In 2014, China started carrying out its plan to attack 5 countries at once. It started building islands, military islands, right here in the South China Sea, inside the borders of other countries. These fake islands had ports, air bases, and anti-aircraft guns, all ready in case of a war. In just 2 years, China has made not 1, not 2, but 7 of these islands in other countries' borders without their permission. This is one of the reasons why US Army experts believe that these islands, right here in the South China Sea, have the highest chance of instigating World War III. And it all starts with the CCP and their unwillingness to respect other countries' borders. So, in this video, let's go over why the South China Sea is so important to the world and why China is willing to start World War III just to control these parts of the sea. I am once again asking you guys to like the video. My recent videos have been getting restricted heavily in the algorithm, and considering this topic is war-related, I doubt YouTube will show me any mercy. So please, consider hitting the like button below. It really helps me out a lot.
The South China Sea,
the hotly contested body of water.
China has conflicting territorial relations with
the 9-dash line.
The islands of the South China Sea
delimits
are China's inherent territory.
Chinese vessels are fanning out across
borders of these South China Sea countries like Vietnam, the Philippines, Indonesia.
Japanese media has also reported that Chinese Coast Guard ships entered the country's territorial waters for a second day in a row.
So before we get into why China is willing to fight so many countries over the South China Sea, first, let's go over what makes this area so important. The South China Sea is a marginal sea in the Pacific Ocean, bounded by South China, the Philippines, Vietnam, Thailand, Taiwan, Malaysia, and Indonesia. This region is believed to have around 28 billion barrels of oil reserves, 266 trillion cubic feet of natural gas, and holds 1/3 of the entire world's marine biodiversity, thereby making it a very important area for the ecosystem, even if fish stocks in the area are rapidly depleting. If all these weren't reason enough, the South China Sea is a very important trade route. As of 2019, around $3.37 trillion worth of global trade passes through this region annually. The main route to and from Pacific and Indian Ocean ports is through the Strait of Malacca and the South China Sea. Generally, oil and minerals move north, and food and manufactured goods move south. As I've covered in my previous videos, China is heavily dependent on oil imports to fuel its economy and its industries. Roughly 50% of Chinese oil imports come from the Middle East, and that oil sails through the South China Sea. And as you guys have already heard the last 1,000 times I've said it, China is the world's manufacturing hub, and its economic growth is fueled by selling those manufactured goods to the rest of the world. A big part of China's exports flow through the South China Sea into the rest of the world. So, I'm sure you guys can see that the South China Sea is very important to China. But, does that mean that it belongs to China? Yeah, I'm not quite sure. So, let's look at China's supposed claim to this area in just a sec, but first let's go over the international law that defines who controls what part of the ocean. According to the Law of the Sea that was signed in a UN convention in 1982, each country's sovereign territorial waters extends to a maximum of 12 nautical miles, about 22 kilometers beyond its coast. But foreign vessels are granted the right of innocent passage through the zone. Beyond its territorial waters, every coastal country may establish an exclusive economic zone, or EEZ, extending 200 nautical miles, about 370 kilometers from shore. Now, remember this, as this will become really important later on in the video. Within the EEZ, the coastal state has the right to exploit and regulate fisheries, construct artificial islands and installations, and use the zone for other economic purposes. Now, every country recognizes this law, including China, And this is actually how every country has claimed their part of the South China Sea, 200 nautical miles from their coast. Every country but China. There are some overlaps in Vietnamese, Malaysian, Brunei's, and Filipino claims, but no one is talking much about that because, well, all of these countries are united together against China's claim. You see, when it comes to this part of the sea, China doesn't want to follow the law of the sea. No. In fact, China wants to follow this made-up 9-dash line to exert its claim. This 9-dash line covers almost 90% of the South China Sea, and the CCP claims that it's all part of China. Now you may ask, what is the reasoning behind this 9-dash line, since there are no laws or really anything that mentions this? Well, according to the CCP's reasoning, a Chinese explorer discovered the South China Sea, so therefore, it belongs to China. I guess by that same reasoning, China belongs to Italy, because Marco Polo, quote-unquote, discovered China. It's time for the CCP to pack it up and hand over the reins to the Italians. Alright, jokes aside, that really is the reasoning the CCP has used to claim pretty much the whole South China Sea, and it has led to some very confrontational situations with other countries.
China
Swarming and threatening
foreign military aircraft. I'm warning you again.
China's Communist Party is building on
previously unoccupied beaches
in the South China Sea.
more than 200 Chinese vessels
anchored at Whitsun Reef
for the disputed South China Sea.
These islands
indicates China's claims of sovereignty of fishing, navigation, and exploitation.
To assert their claim, several countries in the conflict officially renamed the region that they claimed. In September of 2012, the Philippine president signed an administrative order mandating that all government agencies use the name West Philippine Sea to refer to the parts of the South China Sea within the Philippines. Similarly, in 2017, Indonesia renamed northern reaches of its exclusive economic zone in the South China Sea as the North Natuna Sea, in an attempt to assert its sovereignty. All while this is happening, the CCP starts building its own islands in the South China Sea. And not just any islands, military islands. They were home to a few military personnel, an airstrip, and a missile system. Based on international law, these islands were within the Philippines' border. So the Philippines decided to take China to UN court. In 2016, a ruling from The Hague ruled in favor of the Philippines, claiming China had indeed encroached on their land, a ruling that the CCP chose to ignore and has not put into effect yet. To make matters worse, the CCP declared the airspace above the disputed land to be a defensive air identification zone, and issued a notice that aircrafts flying through it would need Chinese permission. This move, while they claim will only be enforced in defense, has further strained relations between these two countries. On top of this, there was a second part of this ruling that was just as important to the whole conflict. You guys remember earlier how I said that according to the law of the sea, 200 nautical miles from the coast is each country's exclusive economic zone? Well, so there's this group of islands in the middle of the South China Sea called the Spratly Islands that all the countries are trying to claim. The main reason being that if you establish a claim on the islands, you can extend your EEZ and control more of the South China Sea. But according to a 2016 ruling, the Spratly Islands were ruled a rock, so they don't extend any country's EEZ. This kinda killed the importance of the islands, but that doesn't mean that the conflict calmed down. China has been using something called the cabbage strategy, or the salami slicing strategy, to choke out supplies to foreign islands. To accomplish this, China will surround a foreign-controlled island with its ships and destroyers to deny access to rival nations, and then try to subsequently claim the islands. Now, of course, the United States has a lot of allies in this conflict, and we have the strongest navy in the world. One important part that the US Navy plays is maintaining peace at sea so world trade can continue without interruption. So, since China was being so aggressive in the South China Sea, the US Navy has increased its presence there to keep peace. And that's where this clip, comes from.
U.S. military aircraft, Papa 8 Alpha.